Stories.
Your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. 855-4-SCHIFF for those of you who want to call in. Well, you know, I'm going to be on Fox News immediately following the end of this show at 12 o'clock. I think my hit time is 12:10 on Fox News. I'm going to be talking about the Herman Cain 9999 plan. So make sure and tune in immediately following the end of this show. You know, I also noticed that Herman Cain yesterday wrote a piece, 9 points defending the false accusations about his 999 plan, and he actually addressed this issue, only he responded to Paul Krugman, who on Saturday afternoon in the doctor's office waiting for his wife decided to write a brief 1 or 2 paragraphs on this very issue the day following the Friday where I addressed the issue on my radio show. Maybe Paul Krugman is listening to the Peter Schiff Show. After all, what other reason would there be for him making the same observation the day after I made it? After all, this plan has been out there for months. Paul Krugman had plenty of time to write about it. But last minute, he decided to type something out in the waiting room of a doctor's office about the hidden wage tax. But anyway, so rather than responding to me, he responded to Paul Krugman. And basically, Herman Cain dismissed the whole allegation by just building the straw man and saying, well, wait a minute, we're lowering the corporate income tax from 35% to 9%, so, you know, this is a non-issue. But again, Herman Cain misses the point that the income tax is paid by the shareholders and the wage tax is paid by workers. So it's two entirely different types of taxes paid by entirely different groups of people. That's the problem. So yes, corporations are having their profits taxed less, but workers are having their wages taxed more. That is precisely the point that Herman Cain is missing, or at least failing to acknowledge. But I will be talking about that again on Fox News. Oh, one more thing before I forget. I mentioned yesterday that I'm going to be engaging in a debate at UCLA in early November when I'm speaking. And I am, but unfortunately that debate is a special debate for UCLA students only. It is being sponsored by UCLA. In fact, it's UCLA that is paying the cost of my opponent to fly from Washington and stay in a hotel to do the debate. Of course, I am paying my own nickel to participate in the debate. But the event that you can buy tickets for on the Europac website is a special event where it's just me speaking about the economy. There will be no formal debate, although I will take questions from the audience. If anybody wants to engage me, they're free to do so. Anyway, let's talk about what's happening overnight in the markets, some of the economic data before I go to the phones. First of all, markets on the defensive. Dow Jones down about 75 points right now. Overnight, we had some news. Growth in China came out at a 2-year low, 9.1%. That's a 2-year low. What would we give in America to get 9.1% GDP growth? Hey, the only thing we've got in America that's 9.1 is our unemployment rate. And, of course, our unemployment rate is actually 16.5. It would be great if it can actually fall as low as 9.1. But, you know, when our unemployment rate equals the Chinese growth rate, that shows you the big difference between the two economies. Bigger news on inflation. First, let's take a look at UK. The UK market reported the largest monthly increase in consumer prices. It came in at 5.2%. That ties the biggest increase in since 1997 in the UK. That's a huge number, given the fact that the economy is as weak as it is, because, of course, back in 1997, when the unemployment rate was as high as it is today, the economy was not as weak as it is today. So this really, again, shows more real-world evidence that the Keynesian myth of the trade-off between inflation and unemployment is not real, that the two are not somehow mutually exclusive. Just because the economy is weak doesn't mean inflation is going to come down. In fact, it's accelerating. And, of course, the Bank of England is saying that, well, this is only temporary. The inflation is going to come down in the future. How does he know that? By what basis can somebody conclude that the inflation is going to go down in the future when the Bank of England is doing more quantitative easing? And they still have interest rates down at 0.5%. They are still throwing gasoline on a fire. By what possible, source can they conclude that the fire is going to go out? It can't. But, and we get the same nonsense on this side of the aisle, on this side, rather, of the Atlantic. We got producer price indexes that came out today. The CPI comes out tomorrow. But the producer price index was up 0.8% for the month. I mean, what does that annualize out to? 10% a year, producer price inflation? Now, of course, the Fed is going to come out and say, well, we expect these prices to to come back down. Well, why? Based on what? I mean, the reason they're rising in the first place is because monetary policy is so easy. We're printing so much money. Well, that's not going to change. That's getting worse. And in fact, with the economy rolling over, the Fed doing Operation Twist, getting ready for more quantitative easing, prices are not going to come down. And in fact, oil prices have already started to reverse their declines. Remember, oil prices got down as low as $75 a couple of weeks ago. They're already back up to $87. So what is he talking about? Prices are already starting to move in the opposite direction, and all these central bankers are trying to say, hey, don't worry, the higher inflation numbers that you're seeing now, they're transitory, they're temporary, they're going to go down in the future. At best, all that is wishful thinking. But at worst, it's just an outright lie. The Fed is trying to dampen expectations. Maybe the central banks think if we just tell people that there won't be any inflation, well, then they'll believe us, and because they won't raise their prices. A lot of this Keynesian nonsense when it comes to inflation has to do with psychology and expectations, as if the only reason that there's inflation is because people think there's going to be inflation, and so it's a self-perpetuating prophecy in that people think there's going to be inflation, so they raise their prices. They think there's going to be inflation, so they demand more wages. But all of that takes the focus on the real source of inflation, which is the central banks that are printing all the money. That's where the inflation comes from. That's where the higher wages come from. That's where the higher prices come from. Anyway, we'll be back. This is Peter Schiff. You're listening to Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. I did mention gold is getting beaten up quite a bit this morning. Looking at the ETF GLD, gold's down about $40. Probably not a bad day to do some buying in the yellow metal. Pretty much everything is down today. U.S. dollar up. Bond prices are up, so rates are down. It's just a very weak tone to the markets today. There is another round of presidential debates tonight, so I'm going to make sure and watch them. It's on CNN. The debates are held out in Las Vegas, the foreclosure capital of the United States. Although I think it's Vegas. I know it's in Nevada. I'm assuming it's from Las Vegas. I think they're also maybe even the unemployment capital of the United States, too. So there might be some interesting questions on the housing crisis, which should be good for Ron Paul, being the only candidate in the race to have warned about and forecast the housing crisis in advance and blame the government for doing it, both Fannie and Freddie and the Federal Reserve. The interesting thing about this debate is that John Huntsman is boycotting it. He's deciding he's not going to be there based on the fact that apparently Nevada is trying to move up the date of its primary and maybe threaten the position of New Hampshire being the first primary in the country, or maybe forcing New Hampshire to move the date of their primary up. I think this is a desperate attempt on the part of Huntsman to try to curry favor with the New Hampshire electorate, because I think his campaign is pretty much do or die when it comes to the New Hampshire primary. If he doesn't do well, it probably marks the end of that campaign. Of course, they offered to allow John Huntsman to debate. He turned it down. They didn't offer an invitation again to Gary Johnson, who statistically is certainly polling no worse than is John Huntsman, or people like Rick Santorum, who somehow managed to get invitations to all the debates, yet Gary Johnson does not. I'm also looking at an article on the media blackout of Ron Paul. Basically, something as if we didn't know this, but this is an independent news agency, mainstream media. This is the Pew Research Center's Project for Excellence in Journalism. And it shows that of all these major candidates that are taking place in the debates, Ron Paul gets less media coverage than any other candidate, despite the fact that depending on what poll you're looking at, he's third or fourth in the polls. He has the least amount of coverage. Rick Santorum gets more media coverage than Ron Paul. John Huntsman gets 50% more media coverage than Ron Paul. 50% more. John Huntsman's like 1 or 2%. Ron Paul's maybe 9 or 10%. Palente gets 150% more media coverage than Ron Paul. Palente? He's nowhere. Look, Gingrich gets about 3 times the media coverage, 350% more. Now, Gingrich is a big figure, but he's doing lousy in the polls. Sarah Palin, she's not even in the race. She gets 350% more coverage than Ron Paul. Michelle Bachmann is getting 5 times the coverage as Ron Paul, even though she's pretty much fallen off the radar screens. In the polls, she's barely registering anymore. Now, of course, Romney and Perry, they're the favorites. Yes, they get a lot more coverage. But why is it that the people who Ron Paul is beating in the polls are beating Ron Paul in the coverage? It only makes you think, imagine how much higher Ron Paul's poll numbers would be if he got as much media coverage as the people who barely register in the polls. Anyway, it's a little food for thought. Let me try to take a break and grab some phone calls. First up is John calling from Danbury, Connecticut. John, welcome to the show. John there? I don't know. John doesn't seem to be answering. Let's try John number 2 in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Peter. I wanted to run something past you. I was trying to think of another perspective. It seemed like the Keynesian economics really took off during the Great Depression. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that it took off during the Great Depression, because I think that during the Great Depression, the Keynesian economics was a disaster. So I'm not sure how many people were fans of it at the time. I think it was the revisionist historians that tried to credit Keynesianism for getting us out of the Depression. Now, I certainly think a lot of people who were getting, unemployment checks and welfare checks were probably grateful that they were getting them, and so they probably elected Roosevelt based on that reasoning. But I think, by his 4th term, Roosevelt was really losing in popularity. I think the public was getting tired of the empty promises of the New Deal. I think if we weren't in the middle of a Second World War, he probably wouldn't have been able to win. But I think it was later on in history the Keynesians tried to claim this New Deal as some kind of great success. They credited it for getting us out of the Depression, even though it took more than a decade. It's hard to argue that that was successful. I would say that, it was the exact opposite, that the reason we had such a Great Depression, the reason it took us so long to get out of it, is because we had to overcome all the barriers that Roosevelt put in our way. The New Deal was making it worse. We got out of the Depression despite the New Deal, not because of it.
But his philosophies on thrift and the way you explain how savings grows an economy, and his idea was savings could destroy an economy. Isn't it true that when he wrote this, and the reason why these philosophies may have taken off is because during the Depression, people weren't saving. They were hoarding money. So because they had such a distrust of the banking system, they didn't know what to do as far as investing their money. They hoarded their money, and that's where the saying, bury your money under the mattress.
Yeah, there is a difference. When you hoard your money, meaning you do not invest it by putting it in a bank or by buying a bond or, loaning it out. Yes, if you're simply hoarding money, then that hoarded money is not going to help the economy grow, but it's also not going to help the individual who's hoarding it grow his wealth. I mean, you don't grow your wealth by hoarding it. You have to make it available to other people to generate a return. But if people are hoarding money, there's got to be a reason for it. And so you've got to let the market correct that problem that will free up that money that's theoretically being buried in the ground. Because if it's happening for a reason, and let the market take care of it. Because people don't want to bury their money in the ground. They either want to spend it or they want to make it grow. But simply putting it in a hole, you get nothing out of that.
We agree that hoarding could potentially destroy an economy. Don't you think that that's why they came up initially with the FDIC, is because people were hoarding money because of a distrust for the banking system?
Well, the banking system, only 2% of all the deposits in the banking system were lost due to bank failures. It wasn't like a widespread. Yes, there were some, high-profile examples of banks that failed. But the market would have taken care of that. Sound banks would have been able to prove their soundness without government backstops, and the market would have functioned. People value banking services. They value the ability to earn interest. I mean, they don't want to bury their money in the sand. Maybe it would have taken place for a short period of time, but the market would have provided a solution that was much better than anything the government could drum up with regulations and subsidies.
But the fear of the banking system, you're losing your money in the banking system, perpetuated the hoarding, is what I'm trying to say. Even that's why.
No, but nobody is going to hoard money. People have to spend money because they have to eat, they have to pay their rent, they have to buy clothes, people. So you can't just not spend money. I mean, you have to. So I don't think that's really the explanation. But anyway, thanks for the call. We will be back. We got a lot more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, 855-4-SCHIFF. We've got some open phone lines if you want to call in. My guest doesn't come in until the top of the next hour, and it is going to be a U.S. Senate candidate from my home state here in Connecticut, Jason McCoy, who's going to be involved in a race that's kind of similar to the race I was in, except he's going to be playing the role of Peter Schiff, although not necessarily because he shares all of my ideology, but he's going to be up against a similar field of opponents, so he's going to have a tough road to hoe. Anyway, we'll be talking with him at the top of the next hour. Meantime, 855-4-SCHIFF if you want to call in. I'm reading an interesting article here in Investors Business Daily. I think the Wall Street Journal might have had a similar story. There's a myth out there from the Keynesians. Of course, there's a lot of myths out there from the Keynesians, but this is one in particular that you hear a lot from the Paul Krugmans of the world, is that the reason that the economy is so weak is because of all this austerity at the government level. The government is cutting back on spending because of all this deficit cutting, and because the government is cutting back, that's why the economy is having all these problems. Well, this article points out that this is actually a lie. If you take a look at the first 9 months of this year and compare it to the first 9 months of last year, federal spending is $120 billion higher. That's a 5% increase in the amount the government is spending. In addition, the deficit spending is also bigger. The deficit during those 9 months is $23.5 billion higher than the deficit in the first 9 months of 2010. So there you have it. The government isn't cutting anything. The budget deficits are getting bigger. Government spending is getting bigger, yet the economy is still stagnating. Now, are the Keynesians really going to argue then that the reason the economy is stagnating is because the deficits aren't big enough? The reason the economy is stagnating is because we haven't increased government spending by an even greater amount than we've already increased it? I mean, how would anybody even believe that? Doesn't it make a lot more sense to say that, hey, maybe the reason that the economy is struggling is because the government won't get out of the way. The government is getting bigger. It's because the government is spending more. It's because the deficits are getting bigger. That is the reason that the economy is struggling. That is the reason that we're not creating jobs. That makes a lot more sense to me than the opposite of that. Anyway, I also want to talk briefly. I get, a lot of emails from listeners to the show, and I get several about my view on the minimum wage law. And I'm talking about the emails where people take issue with something that I have to say. And the minimum wage is one where when I get somebody who wants to challenge me, a lot of times it's about the minimum wage. So I thought I would read from one email, and this is pretty much the sense of how people object to the minimum wage. And this is, the guy wrote me a really long letter, but I'm just going to focus on this minimum wage part of it because, again, I get this quite often from people who want to take issue with me. Here's what he's saying, quote, "You seem to think it is the benefit of all mankind that corporations be able to pay whatever they want for labor. This is an enraging nonsense. If you cared about your workers, you would at least have the decency of proclaiming that they should be paid a living wage. Minimum wage isn't even a living wage in this country. If corporations were allowed to charge whatever they wanted for labor, I guess he means pay, whatever they want for labor, they would pay next to nothing." Okay, so here's an individual who thinks that corporations can pay whatever they want for their workers. Their workers have no say in the matter. That a corporation could dictate the wages that they're going to pay, and that the worker has no choice but to accept whatever meager wages the corporations are willing to pay, and the only reason that they don't pay next to nothing is because the government comes in and puts in a minimum wage. I mean, this is sheer nonsense. Obviously, look, I'm an employer. I employ a lot of people. I don't employ anybody at the minimum wage. The people I employ earn a lot more than the minimum wage. Now, if I thought that they would do as good a job, if I thought my employees would work just as hard for the minimum wage, yeah, sure, I'd pay the minimum wage if I could get away with it. But why can't I? Because after all, if I could slash the pay of all my employees to the minimum wage, I'd make a lot more money myself. So why don't I just do that? Well, because my employees would quit. There's competition. This is a two-way street. The wage is determined by both parties. Corporations just can't pay whatever they want because you got to convince. This isn't a slave society. People are going to sell their labor to the highest bidder. So it's competition that determines what the wages are, not corporations. They don't just decide what it is. The market determines what wages are going to be for particular occupations, for particular skill sets. It's not a corporate decision to make. And, of course, all individuals have a choice. They can work for somebody else or they can be self-employed. So if an individual doesn't like the wages that he is being offered, he is free to just work on his own and create what other income stream his productivity can generate. But this is nonsense to think that, corporations just pay whatever they want. They don't. Now, here is the problem. And again, what he doesn't see on the minimum wage, corporations are not going to pay somebody more than they're worth. Corporations are not in business to lose money. So if they're going to hire somebody, the person they're hiring has to add value to the corporation. That's the problem with the minimum wage. What if the minimum wage is at $8 an hour? What about somebody who can only add $6 an hour worth of value to that business? All that means is that that person is not allowed to work. Even if he wants to work for the $6 an hour, the minimum wage law says you can't. The corporation is not going to say, well, here's a guy that can generate $6 an hour worth of productivity. I'm going to pay him $8 an hour and lose $2. That means the corporation is worse off as a result of the hire. Why would they do that? Why would a company hire somebody if the act of hiring them actually means that their profits go down? They're not going to do it. Corporations are only wanting to hire people if the extra hire results in a higher profit, not a lower profit. And so this is the one thing that all of the critics of the minimum wage seem to overlook, that you can't force a business to pay a worker more than they're worth. Now, of course, what prevents a business from paying an employee less than their worth? Their competition. Because workers are selling their labor just like companies are selling their products. When companies are selling their products, do companies get to dictate prices? No. I mean, obviously, if you're selling products, you want to sell them for as high a price as possible. Why don't companies just jack their prices up? Well, because their customers might not pay that price. The price of goods is determined by a competitive market because there's various businesses competing with one another. Companies just can't charge whatever they feel like. They have to charge a rate that the market will bear. Well, the same thing on labor. You just can't pay your employees whatever it is you feel like paying them. You pay what the market will bear. And anyway, that's the lesson on the minimum wage today. Let me go. I want to play a little sound, too. 855, again, I still don't have any phone calls. If you want to call 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. You know, the class warfare continues. Here's some sound from Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor under Jimmy Carter. He's on Morning Joe. And listen to how he wants to up the ante on class warfare. Here, it's cut number one.
One thought that has occurred to me, and let me sort of mention it here casually without having really thought it through systematically. I think it would be increasingly helpful if there was a movement to publish worldwide lists of people who make, largely through speculation, enormous amounts of money almost instantly and basically hide the fact from their social context.
All right, so anyway, he wants the government to come out with a list of people that make a lot of money. I mean, for what purpose? I mean, are we going to put their addresses so the mob knows exactly where they are? Maybe we could put like a post office version of the 10 most wanted list. We could post a list with pictures and addresses of all the really rich people who are making money speculating. For what purpose? You know, so we can find them easier? You know, so we could drag them out and string them up. Is that what he's talking about? Is that what it's coming down to? Let's get those bastards for making all this money. Now, I understand that he might be upset that there are some people who are making money speculating, right? And that speculative activity doesn't necessarily increase the overall standard of living of society. But if somebody is making money speculating, there's somebody else losing money speculating. So, you know, this is gambling. This is a zero-sum game. But if you're upset about the high level of speculation, don't blame the speculators. Blame the Federal Reserve for making speculation so cheap, for encouraging it and enticing it with this cheap money and guaranteed debt. That is why speculation is on the rise, because government policy subsidizes it. If we had a much higher rate of interest, you wouldn't have all this speculating because they wouldn't get the credit. The credit would be going to entrepreneurs who were investing money to grow their businesses, to invest in more plant and equipment, to hire people. The main reason that all of this credit is redirected from Main Street to Wall Street is because of government policy, is because of the Federal Reserve. That's who we ought to be protesting. Why don't we, instead of putting a list of wealthy people who are making their money on Wall Street, what about we publish a list of the top government regulators? How about the central bankers? How about we post some of their address up there? Because if people want to revolt, if they want somebody to to protest, that's where we need to be. Anyway, now we got a full board of calls, so we will come back. I'm going to take the phone calls when we get back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Bit of a turnaround Tuesday going on in the markets. The Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P all in the positive now. The Dow was down close to 100 points when the show began, now up 22 points. Getting a turnaround in other markets. Some of the commodity currencies, the Aussie, Canadian dollars, they were down earlier. They're all positive. Metals, though, still down. Gold off its lows, but still down just about $30. Silver has cut its losses in half in the last hour, but it's still down about 70 cents. So a lot going on in the markets this morning. Anyway, let me go back to the phone calls. First up is going to be Robert calling from San Jose, California. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning, Pierre. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for calling.
Hey, I saw an article in Vanity Fair talking about the collapse of California and how the nation's economy might splinter upon basically economic regions. Some states might do better, others worse. Being a property owner here in San Jose, if the city of San Jose were to go bankrupt or the state of California were to go bankrupt, what might my liabilities be as a property owner in that municipality or in the state?
Well, I think the whole idea is if the state does go bankrupt, that reduces your liabilities. If they don't go bankrupt, you're stuck with them. In fact, there's a case in court right now. I don't know if I talked about it on this show, but Harrisburg, Pennsylvania has declared bankruptcy. And the creditors are challenging that in court, saying, hey, they have no right to declare bankruptcy, just raise taxes. You can't just go bankrupt. So we'll see what the courts are going to determine. But if it is determined that municipalities, have the right to just go bankrupt, then it lets their taxpayers off the hook. Because if they can't go bankrupt, then they have to pay their bills. They can only pay their bills by taxing, the residents, which means, you get a death spiral. Because if you get a community or even a state where they have no choice, they have to pay their bills, they have to keep raising taxes, and then more people want to leave because now the taxes are higher, and now there's a smaller. Oh, wait, what's going on? Where'd that come from? Anyway, is Robert still there?
I'm still here.
Yeah, so then as they raise taxes and people leave, now you get an even smaller tax base. Now you got to jack taxes up even higher. And so it's a self-perpetuating spiral. So I think that for a lot of taxpayers, bankruptcy would represent a relief. But the problem is, what does that mean for the bondholders? And I said that's one of the reasons that I think it makes very little sense for anybody to hold general obligation bonds of states or cities, municipalities, because one way or another you're going to lose. Either there's going to be massive inflation and you're not going to get your purchasing power back, or there's going to be a default and you're not going to get your purchasing power back. But I don't see any scenario where the bondholders are going to come out ahead.
But as a property owner, part of me was wondering, should I try and get out of Dodge now while I still can and maybe find someone willing to buy a property in San Jose still? Well,
yeah, I think that if San Jose is not going bankrupt, they're just going to have to raise property taxes. Yeah, sure. Property taxes are going to go up. And, of course, as property taxes go up, the value of the real estate is going down because the property tax, the higher the property tax is, the less the real estate has to be worth because, it's a liability associated with owning real estate. Now, during a booming property market, you don't see that because if real estate is going up in value, well, people are willing to absorb the property taxes because they're making it up as the real estate is appreciating. But if you've got a stagnant real estate market, or even worse, a declining real estate market, and then you're trying to increase the taxes on top of that, that just compounds the problem for the homeowner.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, having Prop 13, though, here in California, might that protect us to some degree?
Well, it protects the homeowner today, but it doesn't protect the price because if the property changes hands, whoever buys it is confronted with the new tax structure. So it might be some relief for the people who own the property, but if you try to sell it, the person who's buying it is not going to inherit your tax. They're going to have to pay the new higher tax, and so that's going to be reflected in a lower price. So if you're thinking about selling, it's better to sell now before the property taxes go up, if, of course, you're going to move out of the state. If you're going to sell and you're going to buy another property in California, then, you're going to be subjected to the higher tax rate. So if you're staying in the state, it might make sense to stay put. But if you're planning on getting out of Dodge completely, if you want to leave California, maybe go to someplace like Texas or Florida or someplace where they have a lot lower taxes and you can buy more property for the money, then it would make sense to get out now rather than waiting to get out later when the real estate prices are even lower.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll keep an eye out on that Pennsylvania case then. See.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about it too as we get more. Next up, if we've got some time, is Troy calling from Louisville, Kentucky. Troy, you're on.
Yes, I basically just wanted to call and talk for just a second make a couple points about what's going down at the Occupy Wall Street. Basically, we know that that's not true capitalism. What they're protesting is really, corporatism or fascism. But what I find so funny is that it's open documents that 15 of the top 20 political donors from 1989 to 2011 are all unions. And, but basically they get their own government-sanctioned cartel. And I just wanted to get your opinion on, why do you think I think it's no coincidence that the biggest donors predictably come from the sectors that have the most burdensome barriers.
Absolutely. And, the young people, the unions are the enemies of these young protesters. They're the ones that are erecting all these barriers to entries that hurt young people that are trying to get into the labor force and acquire skills and increase their marketability. They're the ones that are lobbying for all the minimum wage laws that protect higher skilled laborers at the expense of younger, less skilled workers. So all these unions are designed really to protect their membership from competition from younger, less skilled workers. But then they co-opt those very people that their policies are hurting by pretending to champion them. Yes, we're for the worker, we're for the young people, and so we want to demand a minimum wage, and all that does is protect their members from competition from younger up-and-coming workers who would otherwise be willing to offer their services for less money. And so the unions make it illegal to do that to protect their own members. And the irony of it is they make the young people think that they've got their interests at heart when they're stabbing them in the back. Anyway, thanks for your call. We'll be up the second hour coming up after this break, so stick around. We've got an interview with the Republican Senate candidate coming up. And this is Peter Schiff back for hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. And joining me now is my guest, Jason McCoy. Jason is currently the mayor of Vernon, Connecticut. He was first elected in 2007, reelected in 2009. He has recently thrown his hat in the senatorial ring. He is running for the U.S. Senate seat that is being vacated by Senator Joe Lieberman, who has held the seat for some time, both as a Democrat and most recently as an independent, but he is very unpopular. He is stepping down. And this race looks very similar to the race I was in 2010, in that you've got the establishment candidate in Chris Shays. I had, of course, Rob Simmons, who was in my race. You've got the quote-unquote outsider, non-politician, Linda McMahon, who was there when I ran. She's there again, only she has a much higher name recognition starting out this time around than she did 2 years ago. There's another candidate, Brian Hill, who's kind of, inconsequential, most likely just a small candidate. I had Vinnie Flores when I ran. He was another candidate in the race who really didn't have much of a shot. Then, of course, in 2008, there was me trying to buck my way through the establishment candidate and the very well-financed Linda McMahon. And so today, maybe in that role, if not, necessarily my identical ideology, I'm not trying to throw any, of my opinions or philosophies on Jason, but he's certainly finding himself in a similar position. And so I have certainly walked a mile in the shoes that Jason has just put on, and I will have to wish him a lot of luck. But anyway, Jason, welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing good. So thanks for coming on.
That's great. This is great. I really appreciate it. I'm, as you said, I'm running for U.S. Senate because I feel that I have the experience and background that we need to get America back on track, and I think it's time for a change and a person that understands that the country is heading for some really, really serious problems, and a lot of it is based upon economics and some of the philosophy that you talked about over the years.
Yeah. Now I understand that you've been a mayor for a few terms. You're also a lawyer. Was that your profession, a lawyer, or do you bring up some other business experience to the table?
Well, I mean, I've been mayor for 4 years, 2 terms, and during that time I've cut taxes, reduce the cost of government, balance 4 budgets, cut a crime rate by 16%, and at the same time I practice law. I have my own firm. I've represented corporate clients, and as well as I do plenty of trial work, and I have a background in bankruptcy and that type of work.
So you were a partner in your own firm, or you were just a sole proprietor?
I've had partners in the past. I've been on my own basically since I got out of law school in 1998. I was practiced with my uncle for about a year.
Did you guys have any employees?
Yep, we've had several employees, and when you talk about a small business, I mean, I've had 6 or 8 people given different times, various lawyers, but so it's not the small business with 25 people. It's the small business with 6 or 7, and also I understand the difference with the issues of the credit crisis and how that affected my practice or my business as well as my different clients. I see the payroll taxes. I see the taxes that people pay because we actually cut the checks for them, as well as I see that at the municipal level. I mean, one really most recent example was the absolute nightmare that all of us had to go through, small businesses or the municipality. Like, I'm involved with it. We still sign all the checks there. But I think one difficult problem you're going to have, and of course there are many, but there are a lot of former lawyers in Congress already. I mean, it seems like it's almost a natural progression from law to politics, and people don't like politicians. A lot of them, they also don't have a very favorable opinion of lawyers. So when you're trying to win based on a business background, which is what of course Linda McMahon is doing, you're basically saying send another lawyer to Washington. What is it? Why should voters who want a non-politician, why should they go for a lawyer versus Linda McMahon and her background? I think it's mainly because. Well, first, let me just say, the progression for a lawyer really is, you're a lawmaker. So on the legislative level, I understand how to draft, write, and what the implications are of legislation and that. And on the executive level, as the manager of a municipality with 1,100 employees, I understand how what the impact is of budgeting and federal and state regulations on us and what the costs are of those things. So, I mean, I've made a payroll on my own. I've also made a payroll within a budget. I mean, at the federal level, these folks haven't even had a budget for over 800 days. So, frankly, I'm very comfortable, and I understand how to do things. And in those 2 roles, my skills transfer easily to the U.S. Senate. I mean, we're, as you know, and I've listened to your show, we're heading towards an absolute disaster. I mean, overtaxation, unpredictable taxation, overregulation. I mean, one of the regulations I talk to people about, I'm sure you do too, but is the federal regulation on dust generated from cutting corn. I mean, they come up with these absurd things, and they don't realize what the costs are. And then, congressmen turn around and subsidize those things. So,
But do you have a specific strategy to try to overcome the Linda McMahon money machine and the name recognition? Because she's already going to be positioning herself as the alternative to the status quo, as the outsider, as the job creator, to contrast herself with a former Congressman Shays, who she could pretty much take the same blueprint that she used to beat up on Rob Simmons, pretty much use all the same flyers, just change the names, and it's the same campaign. But how do you, I wasn't able to do that. I wasn't able to break in and get enough votes to be able to overcome McMahon. I wasn't even able to get enough delegates to get on the ballot without having to position my way on. I mean, what are you planning on doing to try to succeed in that respect, where I was certainly not able to do it?
Well, I'm familiar with most of the town committees and Republican mayors around the state of Connecticut, mayors and first selectmen. There's about 90 of us. First, we're trying to raise money now. So, if people want to make a contribution, they go to McCoy2012.com. Second, we're trying to get out to the town committees, just as you did, and speak with the different town committees and see if we can lock down enough delegates at the convention so that we don't have to go to a primary. But if you have to go to a primary, that's really when it's going to get costly for all of the candidates, because the ultimate goal here is really to, get America back on track by winning the seat against the Democratic opponent, whether it's Susan Beisowitz or Chris Murphy or Representative Tong.
Yeah. Really, I agree. But I think if you're going into this thing, really committed to trying to win the Senate seat and not, maybe just trying to be a voice, raise your political profile, you have to plan on a primary, because I don't see how you get out of this thing with Linda McMahon in this race. If she doesn't win at the convention, she's not going to back down. So you'd have to either beat her at the convention, which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, it was a very, very, I thought, corrupt process when I went through it. I thought the fix was in. So it's an uphill battle, but we're going to get back and talk more specifics when we come back. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and I am speaking with Republican U.S. Senate candidate Jason McCoy, running here in the state of Connecticut. And Jason, one bit of advice before maybe I ask you for some specifics on the issues. The way I think you need to go after Linda McMahon is mainly on the basis that she can't win. I think you've got to basically say that we've tried that before, it didn't work, the negatives are too high, the pro wrestling is just not selling, women don't like it, and I think you have to position yourself as the outsider, non-professional career politician who can win. And I think that might resonate with some of the the delegates who are tired of losing. We have a pretty bad track record here in Connecticut in the Republican Party. We pretty much lose every race. So that argues for doing something different and not repeating the same old mistakes. So I think maybe that's probably your best path. But let me give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your specifics. Herman Cain is talking about, hey, everybody talks about the problems. I've got some solutions. You can argue with his solutions, but at least he's coming up with something. So what specific policy recommendations are you going to come forward with as a reason that we should send you to the U.S. Senate?
Well, first, there's a lot of them that I'm sure you've talked about over the years on your show, but the most important thing is we got to control the borrowing and the spending that we have, because we're just obviously capped out, and we need to take strong, good positions on continued reduction of government regulations. Those are really significant. My understanding is that we lose trillions of dollars in the economy because of the permitting processes that have been put in place over the years. And it's taken jobs out of the economy, as well as over-regulation in different areas.
Well, specifically, let me give you an example. Ron Paul, I'm going to talk about this later on the show today, came out with his plan to restore America today that included $1 trillion in spending cuts in the first year, including the elimination of 5 government departments that include departments like the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. Would you be able to support a plan like that? I mean, if you were Senator McCoy, would you vote to eliminate some of these departments and cut government spending?
Maybe not exactly all the ones that Ron Paul had said, but yes, absolutely. There are way too many departments. The major problem is that there are strings attached to funding that they give to states and municipalities. I mean, we deal with the block grant program in my municipality. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about taxes? I mean, is there anything that you would propose to make changes to our current tax structure, to reform our tax code?
Well, I mean, a number of the items, especially representatives, they've been talking about in the reduction of the various, I guess they call them loopholes, to reduce the overall tax rate. But there are other areas too. I mean, think about how absurd it is that you actually pay tax to employ someone. I mean, the payroll tax on both sides for the employee and the employer. It doesn't make any sense. Some of the retroactive taxes that they put in effect, the costs that we have. In a multi-trillion-dollar economy, they can't reduce their costs. That a multi-trillion-dollar budget, they can't reduce their costs. And, not to mention that we don't even have a budget. They haven't had a budget for over 800 days. I mean, that's appalling. I mean, I'm surprised that the presidential candidates on the Republican side haven't even, brought that up as much as they should have. I mean, there's no way that you could ever get your costs in line. You could ever budget for anything, and you could ever plan taxation as a government if you don't even have a budget in place.
Yeah, well, you're definitely right that, taxing payrolls, diminishes the incentive to hire people. It artificially increases the cost of labor, and ultimately all payroll taxes are borne by the employee. But if we got rid of the payroll tax, where's the government going to get that revenue? Or would you be prepared to cut trillions out of the budget so that we didn't have to make up the lost revenue because the government wouldn't need the money because it wouldn't be spending it?
Yes. And when you talk about cuts, it's interesting. I don't believe that the money that they are spending is being effectively spent at the best rate. I believe that the cost of government can be reduced. The cut without impacting services. I've done it at the local level. It may not seem like a big deal in an $80 million budget, but I've done that, having reduced the cost. We've had fights with labor. I've renegotiated 17 contracts. As a matter of fact, the Board of Education. This is, in Connecticut, it might be it's a big deal, and most people would know about it. But we now manage the facilities and the maintainers on in the Board of Education budget. That's something that really doesn't go on in Connecticut. But so I've kept the same departments but made them work together. And
yeah. But, a lot of people want to talk about, just saving money by making the government more efficient. But the problem is it's not going to be efficient. It's not a private business. It's government. And so whatever money government spends, it's going to spend it inefficiently. That's the problem. So the only solution is to give the government a lot less money to spend. Have the government, carry out just a few functions, because whatever it does, it's going to screw up. So we need to make government as small as possible, and that means we have to cut as much as possible. I know you said you didn't necessarily sign on to the departments that Ron wants to cut. Are there any off the top of your head or that you've thought about that you think that we'd be better off without?
Well, I mean, all Republicans have been talking about the Department of Education, for years and years and years. I think that a lot of things you do at the local level or the state level, you do better than you do at the federal level. So Reagan had come through with the block grants. That seems to be a more effective way if you're going to administer something.
One argument you could make, trying to run as a senator from Connecticut is Connecticut. We send a lot more money to Washington in taxes than we receive in benefits from all these programs. So if we simply eliminated the programs and the taxes that were funding them, Connecticut would see a windfall. And then the state of Connecticut could either use that money to provide the services locally at a higher level, or simply allow Connecticut residents to keep the money.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always better to have them keep the money. And when you said cutting before, what I'm saying is, yes, you'd reduce the amount of money that is being budgeted, and people would have to get it done with what they have. Or the government would have to get it done with what they have.
So anyway, how's your organization? Do you have a campaign headquarters yet?
Well, we have it up in my hometown in Vernon. I got my treasurers out in Plainville, and we have a lot of volunteers. And we're just putting everything together now. Started a little bit late because of the storm. I was managing that crisis for about 2 weeks. I was hoping I would have started earlier. So we have a number of volunteers and, people.
All right. Well, Jason, look forward to seeing some of you on the campaign trail, learning a little bit more about your candidacy and your ideas. I wish you luck. You've got a tough journey ahead of you, and so I applaud you for taking on the challenge. Anyway, we will be back. We have another full half hour of the Peter Schiff Show coming up next, so stick around. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. And again, to remind you, I will be on Fox News immediately following this show. And I also just find out that later this evening, I will be on the PBS Nightly Business Report Again, also to discuss the fourth 9 in the Herman Cain 9999 plan. In the meantime, we're still taking some calls here at 855-4-SCHIFF. Before I go to the phones, I want to go over the Ron Paul plan to restore America that officially made its debut today, or I think yesterday, I'm not sure, but it's up on the Ron Paul website. I am there now, and I am reading from some of the plan. Number one, the plan promises to cut $1 trillion in spending in the first year, which of course would still leave us with a deficit. That's how big it is. But Ron Paul is calling for a balanced budget in his third year of his term. Part of the spending cuts includes the elimination of 5 departments: energy, HUD, commerce, interior, and education. It's a good start. There's a few more departments I think we could throw on the chopping block, but it is a move in the right direction. On entitlements, Ron kind of takes a punt on this issue for now. I can understand the politics of it. Maybe let's address this one later. But he promises to keep all the commitments to our seniors and our veterans. I don't think it's possible to keep all those commitments, so we're going to have to level with our affluent seniors and let them know that, hey, they're on their own. We can't keep sticking it to their kids and grandkids. But apparently Ron Paul wants to let the people who are under 25 opt out, which is good for the people who are under 25. The government's going to lose that tax revenue, but the under 25-year-olds will be able to keep that money, I guess, and invest in a retirement plan that will actually be there for them, unlike Social Security. But hey, why is that fair? What about the guy who's 26, 27? Why is he screwed? Why is he stuck in this? I just don't think that's fair either. I think we need a more equitable solution, but I guess it's incremental, one step at a time. Ron Paul is talking about cutting about another 10%. He wants to slash the federal workforce. Good idea. He wants to cut pay, including the pay of the president, which he wants to reduce from $400,000 a year all the way down to $39,000, $336, which apparently is equal to the median personal income in America. So in other words, if Ron Paul becomes a president, he's going to earn a lot less as the president than he currently earns as a member of the House of Representatives. Hey, that's a great idea, too. On taxes, the Ron Paul plan is going to lower the corporate tax rate to 15% and allow American corporations to repatriate their foreign earnings tax-free, meaning they'll only pay the taxes in the countries where they earn the money. They're not going to be hit with a second level of taxation when they bring it home and use it to grow the economy or reward their shareholders with dividends. That is a good idea. Also, he abolishes the estate tax, the death tax. That is a great, great idea. Costs very little money, but it delivers a huge bang for the buck as far as economic growth and job creation. It is a big, big positive that costs the Treasury very little in the way of lost revenues. Also wants to end taxes on personal savings. Great idea. Ending capital gains. All these are pro-growth ideas that will not actually cost the Treasury a lot in revenue. In fact, they actually might backfire, or not really backfire, but results in even additional revenue. A lot of regulations he wants to throw out: Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Sarbanes-Oxley on the chopping block, getting repealed. Good stuff. I'd like him to throw the Patriot Act in there. Why not? For good measure. Let's get rid of that. But maybe he's afraid of the politics of appearing unpatriotic. Believe me, there's nothing patriotic about the Patriot Act. Monetary policy, audit the Fed, and legislation for competing currencies. We need that. Take away the capital gains taxes on gold and silver so gold and silver can compete with the Federal Reserve. Good ideas. Overall, it's a very bold and good plan by Ron Paul. Interestingly enough, I saw him on CNBC this morning, and the anchor was just kind of going after Ron about, why he didn't have more cuts in there for Social Security and Medicare. And Ron responded that, are you saying that my plan isn't bold enough, that we're not cutting enough? Because he's the only guy in the race. Well, of course, apart from Gary Johnson, who the media has decided doesn't belong in the race, but they have allowed Ron Paul in. I guess for the media, one libertarian is probably one too many, but he's the only one that they're allowing to speak. But of all the candidates who's talking about cutting government spending, now Ron Paul's got the only plan to cut government spending. I wonder what Herman Cain's plan is. He talks a lot about cutting government spending, yet there are no cuts that he's proposed. The only thing he really has proposed so far is a big tax increase on the middle class and the lower class and a tax cut for the high-income earners. I'm happy to have that tax cut personally, but I don't know if it's going to fly with everybody else. Also, Herman Cain does have a solution for Social Security, the Chilean model. Of course, that's not really a viable, workable solution because it would cost us a fortune. Because in the Chilean model, what happens is, the government lets all the young people opt out and put their Social Security taxes into their own accounts, but then that blows a hole in the budget because how is the government going to keep the commitments to the current generation when it was relying on those revenues? You can't go from a pay-as-you-go system to a funded system without a mechanism to finance the transaction, and we're broke. Yes, if the country was wealthy, if we had a big budget surplus, maybe the government would have some money to pay for the transition. But we don't. We'd have to borrow it, so the deficit would go through the roof. So that isn't actually a viable alternative. That would have been a good alternative back in 1981, or 83 rather, when we had the Social Security reform. That was the time when we should have adopted the Chilean model, when Reagan was around and Greenspan headed the commission. But unfortunately for America, we didn't have the political courage to do that back then. And so now we've left ourselves in a situation where that model just ain't viable. We have to come up with something more dramatic because the circumstances are that much more dire than they were then. Anyway, we'll see how Ron Paul brings this Restore America plan up in the debates later tonight from Las Vegas on CNN. Also, so it'll be interesting to see if Herman Cain's opponents use any of my stuff to come after him on the 9999 plan, because literally you're not going to find an economist on this planet, including Paul Krugman. Even the Keynesian economists know enough about Econ 101 to know that a payroll tax doesn't fall on the shareholders, it falls on the workers, and that's going to be a tough nine for Herman Cain to explain if he gets challenged on it in the right way. Anyway, let me go back to the phones. Again, if you want to call, it's 855-4SCHIFF, 855-4SCHIFF. Anyway, on hold is Tony calling from Chicago, Illinois. Tony, you're on.
Hey, Peter, thank you for taking the call. I just had a quick question. Like, if we have the dollar collapse, how would that affect our offshore work? A lot of the work that Americans hire offshore, like in India, and would be expensive to?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when the dollar loses value, all of the outsourcing that we've done over the years is going to get a lot more expensive. No question about it. The people who are working cheap for Americans in places like India and China, they won't be working so cheap anymore. And we're going to have to suffer from those higher costs. I mean, for years and years, the story was we imported deflation from all over the world, right? And it wasn't really deflation, but we got cheaper goods and services from other countries, and that kept the economy going. We were able to afford a more expensive government because we got less expensive stuff coming in from abroad in the form of goods or services that we could outsource. But when you reverse that, when all of a sudden the goods are more expensive to import because the dollar goes down, when all these call centers in other countries, when they sap that much more of our rent income because the dollar has gone down and now it's a lot more expensive to hire these foreign workers, yeah, we're going to have to bear the cost of that through our economy, through higher prices to Americans or lower wages or any combination of the two. But it is going to be difficult, and the result is going to be a reduction in our standard of living.
So wouldn't that mean, like, people, they will start hiring more people here, obviously for lower wages, because that'll be expensive to hire them here too, but then it will increase the employment rate here a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
Well, a lot of that depends on what we're doing. Now, if we are repealing regulations, and then yes, if we're simply adding new costs onto U.S. businesses, let's say that we see a 20% increase in the dollar cost of foreign workers. if the U.S. government offsets that with a 20% increase in regulatory and compliance costs to hire American workers, then we're not going to see a benefit. We're just going to see higher costs. But if we can have a more competitive environment that's not as hostile to businesses, absolutely, we will be creating more jobs here because Americans will now be more competitive than the foreign workers.
Okay. And the other question is like for example, right now the U.S. for $1 you can get 0.89 Swiss francs. Now, when the dollar covers, you're saying that for $1 it will be like 0.49. Is it going to cut by?
Well, you're going to get fewer. I mean, you're going to get fewer and fewer francs for your dollar or any other currency as the dollar weakens, which means if you want to import something from Switzerland, it's going to cost you more money. If you want to hire somebody to do some work for you and they live in Switzerland, you're going to have to pay them more money. Now, maybe as a result of that, you might not hire someone in Switzerland. You might hire somebody in America. But, there's a lot of other considerations. Maybe the person in Switzerland is that much more productive. Maybe because he doesn't have all the regulation. Maybe he's got better training, better education. A lot of those things are going to factor into what determines these wages. But yeah, I think that a lot more work will ultimately be done in America when the dollar loses a lot of value, and that ultimately has to happen. So in that respect, that's a good thing, but it's not going to feel very good. Anyway, we'll be right back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Is Peter Schiff back for the final segment here of the Peter Schiff Show, watching the markets rebound on this turnaround Tuesday. The Dow now up better than 65 points. Metals continue their recovery. GLD is still down about $23, but that is a $20 rally from where we were when I first mentioned gold earlier in the program. Silver now only down about 28 cents. That's better than a dollar rally from where it was earlier in the program. We'll see if these metals can go positive by the end of the day. Meantime, let me go back to the phone calls. First up is going to be Josh calling from Florida. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. I'm not sure if you addressed this earlier. I missed part of the Ron Paul discussion, but I know initially he was talking about balancing the budget in his first year, and now the plan is to balance it within 3. So I was just wondering what your opinion is regarding
Well, it's
that.
better than not balancing it at all. I mean, but he's talking about $1 trillion in cuts in the first year, which, is pretty big in 1 year. But, as I said, personally, I would be bolder, but, maybe politically that's just the tack that they're going to follow. But I think we need more than that. I think we need to do it. Gary Johnson was saying let's balance it in the first year. So, the faster the better as far as I'm concerned. This whole idea that somehow we're going to hurt the economy by cutting too much too soon, that's nonsense. The more we cut and the sooner we cut it, the better off we're going to be.
Right, that's how I felt. I've been following Ron Paul for quite some time now, and so I was a little bit disappointed in the plan. I didn't think it was bold enough either.
Well, the thing is, though, Ron's point is it's a lot bolder than anybody else. So let's see. Maybe the incrementalist strategy is going to work. I haven't done any of the polling. I trust Ron. He's an honest guy, and he wants to do the right thing. And so, maybe if it's going to be incremental, it's better than not doing it at all.
Right. I trust him too, and I was reading. I think maybe he went with this plan instead of balancing in the first year because I saw Dean Baker came out and he was having a heart attack at all the spending cuts. So maybe it's just kind of a way to ease everyone in. You think?
Maybe, but I think, he's still, he's got to take down the Herman Cain plan because Herman Cain's plan sounds like it's a free lunch for everybody because he's saying that we're going to cut everybody's taxes, and not talking about the spending cuts specifically that's going to make it possible. Meanwhile, he's not really cutting everybody's taxes. He's raising taxes on the majority of Americans. That's, so that has to be brought out because otherwise Ron Paul is more stick and Herman Cain is more carrot. So Ron Paul has to show how his plan actually has more of a carrot than the Herman Cain plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, because Herman Cain, as I said, where she's sticking it to a lot of people who think they're getting a carrot. Anyway, next up is Scott, who is calling from Dallas, Texas. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. Quick,
How are you?
couple of questions. I've had an account with you since early '08, and so I took a hit then. So kind of trying to recover on it. I have also kind of my own online account. And
Hey, were you able to add any money to your account since early '08, or are you pretty much still working with your original investment?
I did add a little bit. But I'm still. The point is that your account, the account with you, it's mostly foreign stock, and the one I have online is all U.S. And I'm pretty much with the same gains. I've been lucky enough to go down, but pretty much the increase has been the same. So
the timing. You got in at kind of the high point for foreign stocks and the low point for the dollar. So, you've had to make that up. But my guess is that for a while, you were doing worse with the foreign stocks. So, chances are they'd at least, got you back to, even with the U.S. stocks. It's unfortunate if you weren't able to put more money into the account after the big drop, because that's when they really were giving stuff away.
Right.
Did you buy any precious metals, though, or you just have stocks?
I got a couple of I got some.
All right, well, that's good, because I know you got to be ahead there. Even if you bought precious metals either from me or somebody else at the same time in early '08, you're well ahead now, so that should be working in your favor.
Yeah, I'm in fact looking at getting some more gold from you, as a matter of fact. But my main question here is in the past, you talked a lot about decoupling.
I still do.
Where are we with that? Because it seems like the U.S. goes down, or Europe goes down, and Asia goes down as well. So it doesn't seem to be.
Well, I think decoupling is a process. It's not going to happen like a light switch. I think that process is working. If you look at the economic growth rates, like I mentioned, China's growth rate is at 9.1. I mean, that's still a lot of economic growth. The fact that the U.S. economy is stuck in the mud is not derailing the economic growth in China. In fact, it's not derailing the economic growth in a lot of countries. So you're still seeing economies decoupling. I would say that the process in the financial markets is much more slow. So that, yes, you're seeing stock markets all around the world go up and down together. There's very little negative correlation right now between any of the stock markets, and in fact, between any of the asset classes. In general, when stocks go up, commodities go up, gold goes up. And when stocks go down, gold goes down, commodities go down. I mean, it's not every day, but that there is a much stronger positive correlation. I think over time, those correlations are going to break. As the economies continue to decouple, I think the financial markets will begin that decoupling process. But, I don't know exactly when you're going to see it, but I think it doesn't mean that, hey, I'm not going to buy any foreign stocks because every time U.S. stocks go down, the foreign stocks go down too. I think eventually that's not going to be the case. But also, we could have a big rally in the U.S. stock market. And then, we might have an even bigger rally in the foreign stock markets, which I think will be the case, because if we do have a big rally in U.S. stocks, I think it's going to be accompanied by a big drop in the dollar. That has been the way it's worked for the last several years. I think it'll work again. And I do think that with central banks committed to printing money, that's what's going to happen. I mean, they can print enough money to make sure that the markets go up. I mean, at least nominally speaking. Maybe not in real terms, but in nominal terms. So I don't think you want to just, stick it all in cash just because of the correlations that have existed recently. But anyway, hey, I really thank you for your call. We're running out of time for this show. I appreciate your business and, look forward to working with you. And if you want to call again with another question, feel free. Anyway, that's it for today. Don't forget, I'll be on Fox News in about 10 minutes, so stick around, and PBS later this evening. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.